Following the hectic years of World War II, Britain's railways were in dire need of investment. With no money forthcoming, nationalisation loomed, which came into effect in 1948. In this programme, we'll take a look at British Railways from its formation, through its development of new technology and working practices, to sectorisation of the 1980s, leading to eventual privatisation in the 1990s. This is British Railways at 75. British Railways was formed in 1948 after the government's announcement of the 1947 Transport Act. It also saw the creation of the British Transport Commission, who oversaw all public services, from road haulers to canals and docks, the idea being to develop an integrated transport system. After the war, Britain had to make do and mend, whilst other countries, such as France and the Netherlands, had to completely rebuild their railways from scratch, with new stock and electrification. Upon nationalisation, BR inherited 20,352 locomotives, 55,666 carriages, and 1.2 million wagons. All were very mixed, with some locomotives being of pre-grouping origins, which had to be kept on because of the war. After 1948, some 1,538 locomotives were built from post-war designs by the Big Four. The GWRs came from Hawksworth, the Southern had the Bullied Pacifics, the LMS from Ivett and the Black Fives, with the LNER producing the B1s and designs from Peppercorn. There were also 67 diesel and 17 electric locomotives. To help its management teams, BR was divided up into regions, based largely on the Big Four. The GWR, who opposed nationalisation, became the Western Region, and would rebuild the stations at Banbury and Plymouth, and build a new marshalling yard at Margam in South Wales. The Southern became the Southern Region, and had the company's last general manager, John Elliott, at its head. The region was further split into the old Southern subdivisions, and inherited some formerly independent railways such as the Kent and East Sussex. The LMS became the London Midland region, which only applied to England and Wales. It too inherited a former independent company, the Mersey Railway, but lost the former London, Tilbury and Southend system to the Eastern region. The Eastern region controlled the southern half of the LNER, mainly the former Great Northern, Great Eastern and Great Central, as far as Doncaster. Beyond the town, the northeastern region took over, as far as Berwick, and was the largest freight carrier, with conurbations around Tyneside and Teesside. In Scotland, the Scottish region took over all former LMS lines from Gretna and LNER ones from Berwick. This included cross-country routes, such as the Waverley to Carlisle and the Port Road to Stranraer, alongside numerous branches and the conurbations around Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen. Also in 1948, a series of trials ran with selected locomotives from each of the Big Four across three categories: express passenger, mixed traffic and freight. The idea was to compare designs and take some features to incorporate them into a new standard range. To ensure fairness, each category ran on a selected route from each company. The West of England Main Line to Exeter, for example, was for express passenger types, the Highlands Main Line for mixed traffic, and the Midland Main Line from Brent to Towton for freight. Unfortunately, GWR participants were restricted to the East Coast Main Line and the Great Central. So, additional tests on the Western region ran in November and December, being similar to the main trials, and used Welsh coal rather than Yorkshire coal. To further develop locomotive performance, a testing plant was opened at Rugby, similar to the one established by the GWR at Swindon. This was the brainchild of Sir Nigel Gresley, and backed by the LMS and LNER, with work starting in the 30s, but was delayed by the war. The new standard range would cover all duties, being based around simplicity and efficiency. 999 would be constructed, with 2 cylinders, Walschaerts valve gear and other features such as rocking grates and self-cleaning smoke boxes. 12 classes were drawn up, incorporating the best ideas from the Big Four, using the results from the exchange trials. Despite this, they had a strong LMS influence, who had started a similar programme under Ivert before nationalisation. The first standard, the Britannias, with 55 members, appeared in 1951. Allocated to all regions except the northeastern, the first examples went to East Anglia, whose motive power still dated back to Great Eastern days. One, number 70004 William Shakespeare, was displayed at the Festival of Britain, later being one of 3 allocated to the prestigious Golden Arrow. Next was the sole 3-cylindered locomotive, number 71000 Duke of Gloucester. This was supposed to be the ultimate express locomotive with caprotti valve gear. Unfortunately, a number of design faults gave the Duke a poor reputation, most notably the fitting of a standard double exhaust instead of the intended Calchap type. The Duke was followed by the 10 Clans, based on the Britannias but with a smaller boiler. Split between Polmadie and Kingmore, they only worked on the West Coast Main Line and Settle and Carlisle, but did venture further south on occasions. The 172 5MTs were essentially an update on the LMS Black 5s. Like their forebearer, they could go anywhere, with 30 being fitted with caprotti valve gear, like that fitted to Duke of Gloucester, whilst the southern region gave theirs names from withdrawn King Arthurs. In the range were 3 types of 4MT. The first were the 460s, allocated to the western, midland and southern regions. The latter gave theirs larger tenders, with the western and midland fitting some with double chimneys from 1957. A 260 version numbered 115 examples, being based on the Ivert 4MTs. Allocated to all regions except the western, the southern again fitted larger tenders, whilst the northeastern region used some of theirs on the Stainmore route. Next came another mogul, classified 3MT. Only 20 were built, based on the northeastern region, who again employed them over Stainmore, and the Scottish region for work on branches and secondary routes. The 65 2MT 260s was another Ivert copy. None went to the eastern and southern regions, with the western using them in Wales, particularly on the Cambrian. The Scottish region, meanwhile, employed them on branches, like the 3MTs, including those off the Waverley route. Also in the range were 3 classes of tank engine, the largest being the 155 4MT 264s. On the eastern region, they worked on the former Tilbury system alongside their LMS counterparts, with the Scottish region using them around Glasgow. None went to the western, but after the electrification of the Tilbury system, some went to the Cambrian, with the largest allocation going to the southern. The 45 3MTs were a tank version of the moguls, with the class split between the western, southern and northeastern regions. Once again, the western used them in Wales, with the southern examples working around London. The final tank class was the 30 2MTs, split between the London Midland and Southern regions. The London Midland allocated theirs across the region for branch work, with some being push-pull fitted. A similar pattern was used on the Southern, where they replaced many pre-grouping designs. The last design in the standard range was also the most numerous, the 251 9F 210Os. On the eastern region, the 9Fs worked on the Great Central from Annesley and the East Coast Main Line, regularly reaching 90 miles per hour. In the northeast, they handled the heavy iron ore traffic from Tyne Dock to Concert, whilst further south they found a niche hauling passenger trains on the Somerset and Dorset. A number of experiments were trialled, including one with a Giesel ejector, mechanical stokers, and 10 with Crosty boilers. All the standards came from the drawing board of Robert Riddles, born in 1892, starting as an apprentice at Crewe in 1909. Studying electrical engineering, he reorganised Crewe works between 1925 and 27, taking inspiration from Horwich. A similar plan was implemented at Derby, with support from Ivert. During the 1926 general strike, Riddles worked as a driver, becoming Stanley's assistant in 1933 and appointed Director of Transport Equipment during World War II. Returning to the LMS, he was made Vice President in 1944. Under BR, he was appointed a member of the Railway Executive, recruiting from LMS staff, and always had crews in mind, given his experience during the general strike. Sadly, on the morning of the 8th of October 1952, a tragic double collision occurred at Harrow and Wealdstone, when, during the mist, an express from Perth missed a series of red signals. It careered into a commuter train, only to be hit by a Liverpool Express coming in the opposite direction. Both collisions were at 60 miles per hour, with the debris spewed across the platforms, also bringing down part of the footbridge. 13 coaches were compressed into a section measuring 130 feet long, 50 feet wide and 30 feet high. With 112 deaths and 150 injuries, Harrow is still the UK's worst rail accident in peacetime. 5 years later, another collision in fog happened at Lewisham, again caused by the driver missing 2 caution signals. Worse still, the accident brought down a 350-ton bridge, resulting in 90 deaths and 173 injuries. Following these events, BR developed a new safety system called Automatic Warning System, based on the GWR's ATC system from 1906. It consisted of a ramp between the rails set at a distance from a signal, which connected with a shoe on the locomotive. A similar system was installed by the LMS on the Tilbury network. If the signal was at danger, a horn sounded in the cab, with a bell ringing for clear. If the horn wasn't engaged, the brakes would automatically apply, and both the GWR and LMS examples were used to develop the new AWS. Despite the influx of the standards, BR announced its Modernisation Plan in 1955, with the aim of spending £1.24 billion over the next 15 years. Under the plan, new stock would be introduced, track and signalling upgraded, with stations and depots modernised or rebuilt to create a new, more appealing railway for customers. The new stock would include a fleet of new diesel and multiple units across a wide range of horsepower. These would undergo a series of assessments before production, but due to a lack of experience, British Railways had to look overseas. This lack of experience resulted in only 7 prototype diesels across the power range, which underwent testing as initially planned. These 7 were split across 3 categories, which later expanded to 5 based on the horsepower. The majority of the work was contracted out, with some more successful than others. Those with little experience included British Thomson Houston and Clayton, but more successful were English Electric, Brush and Sulzler. Shunters came in 2 types, small with less than 300 horsepower and large with 300 to 799. The larger type was based on an LMS design from 1945, with nearly 1,000 constructed from 1952 to 62. The Type 1s ranged from 800 to 1,000 horsepower and were the most unfortunate. With cutbacks later on, they lost most of their work due to a fall in traffic, with some being withdrawn as early as 1968. The Type 2s ranged from 1,000 to 1,499 horsepower. There were a few failures, such as the Baby Warships, Baby Deltics and Cobos, with 2 more successful designs from the Birmingham Carriage and Wagon Company for use in Scotland. The largest numerically was a Brush design with an engine from English Electric, with many surviving into the 21st century. 3s were rated at 1,500 to 1,999 horsepower and included the Ivett twins and Bully diesels already in use. 3 new classes followed from the BRCW, Bayer Peacock and English Electric, with the latter being the most numerous. Type 4s ranged from 2,000 to 2,999 horsepower and had the most designs at 12. This included 2 prototypes and 2 ranges, the Warships from the North British Locomotive Company and the Peaks from Sulzler. The most numerous came from Brush, with English Electric making another addition in 1967. Only one Type 5 was included, the Deltix from English Electric with 3,000 horsepower. Intended for the East Coast Main Line, the prototype appeared in 1955, but production didn't start until 1961, with 22 locomotives replacing 55 Pacifics. The majority of the new fleet were diesel electrics, but the western region chose to use diesel hydraulics. This had already been developed in Germany, culminating in the V200 class for the German Federal Railway. The first UK examples came from the North British Locomotive Company, with Swindon producing a V200 copy but reworked to fit within its loading gauge. The first, number D800, was also the first diesel locomotive from Swindon Works, outshopped in 1958. Powered by two Bristol Siddeley engines, copied from the Maybachs fitted to the V200s, the class initially suffered from electrical faults. However, these were soon fixed, and afterwards the class regularly clocked up 380 miles per day with a maximum speed of 90 miles per hour. Construction continued until 1961 from Swindon and the North British, with the latter having MAN engines and Voith transmissions. The next class of hydraulic was drawn up by the BTC's design panel, made up of engineers and designers. The result was a very handsome locomotive, which was more powerful than the earlier classes. The power came from two uprated Bristol Siddeley Maybachs with 1,350 horsepower each. The transmission was from Voith, with the six-wheel bogies providing more traction, ideal for the steep gradients in South Devon. Production started in 1962 from Swindon and Crewe, and kept the Swindon tradition of using cast number and nameplates. However, they were limited to 80 miles per hour due to rough riding, but after changes to the bogies, this was increased to 90 miles per hour. As well as locomotives, BR produced a range of DMUs for secondary routes and branch lines. Based on the GWR railcast from 1933, the DMUs could work in multiple, with one driver controlling two units. Other benefits included greater flexibility during peak hours and a cleaner environment, with reduced servicing times. As with the locomotives, various contractors and workshops were employed, with the largest producer being Metropolitan Camel in Birmingham. The majority were diesel electrics, but the Class 127 was a diesel hydraulic, with some units being designed specifically for express turns. The Modernisation Plan also included the electrification of 3 intercity routes: the West Coast Main Line to Manchester via Birmingham, the East Coast Main Line to Leeds, and the Great Eastern Main Line to Ipswich, with the southern region continuing with its third rail expansion. Overall, the electrification offered a cleaner and more reliable service, but the building costs were very high, as all the track, signals and infrastructure needed changing. Before the plan was announced, BR had completed the electrification of the Woodhead route in 1954. Started by the LNER using 1500 volts DC, this was another project delayed by the war. It involved a new tunnel at Woodhead, with depots at Redditch, Darnhall and Wath, but a planned loop to Manchester Central was excluded. 2 locomotives would be used. The first, the EM1s, was for freight work and based on an LNER design from 1941. The larger EM2s for passenger duties, meanwhile, was completely brand new, first appearing in 1953. The old manual signalling was replaced by colour lights, and the first section from Wath to Penistone was switched on in 1952. Manchester to Penistone was completed in May 1954, followed by Penistone to Sheffield in September. Another LNER project delayed by the war was that to Southend. Using the same system as the Woodhead route, the project had reached Shenfield by 1949. Chelmsford was achieved in 1956, followed by Southend later that year. The first section of the West Coast Main Line project ran from Crewe to Manchester and switched on in 1960. Extended to Liverpool in 1962, the scheme slowly advanced, firstly to Euston in 1965, Birmingham in 1967, and finally Glasgow in 1974. As mentioned, the southern region continued its third rail expansion laid out by the Southern Railway. Work resumed in 1962, firstly east to Portsmouth and then along the Kent coast to Gillingham, Ramsgate and Dover. Its next major project was then the South Western Main Line from Waterloo to Bournemouth via Southampton, completed in 1967. In the same year, the only remaining part of the Isle of Wight network was completed from Ryde Pierhead to Shanklin, using ex-London Underground stock due to restricted clearances. When it was created in 1948, some routes in one region actually belonged to another, a relic of the Big Four. So, in 1958, BR decided to move these routes into their accompanying region. Examples were the Somerset and Dorset from the southern to the western, the Great Central from the eastern to the Midland, and Midland lines going to the northeastern. 1960 would mark the end of an era when 9F number 92220 emerged from Swindon on the 18th of March. Painted Brunswick green and given a copper cap chimney, she was named Evening Star, the name being chosen through a competition. Steam had truly come full circle, as the GWR's first locomotive had been named Morning Star. Based at Cardiff Canton, Evening Star had a brief spell on the Somerset and Dorset, and hauled its last Pines Express on the 8th of September 1962 before withdrawal in 1965. Despite the Modernisation Plan, British Railways was still in dire straits, with no increase in revenue. The NCB could not guarantee good quality coal, which sped up the elimination of steam to the extent that all diesel testing was curtailed. Massive orders were placed before prototypes. By 1961, 1,000 diesel locomotives were in service, with another 800 on order across 19 classes. Some of these became inadequate, and there was a severe lack of training. The plan was revised in 1959 to further speed up the elimination process. In 1958, for example, BR had 16,108 steam locomotives, reducing to 7,050 by 1963. Diesels, meanwhile, increased from 108 to 2,051, with DMUs rising from 2,417 to 4,145. Rolling stock suffered too, with a plan to fit continuous air brakes on wagons dropped by regional managers who preferred the vacuum system. This was supported by higher officials and ultimately failed in the long term, setting BR back by 10 years. Private motoring was underestimated, and there was a huge wastage in new marshalling yards as containerisation of freight developed. Some positives, however, included the installation of new colour light signals controlled by power boxes, new stations and continuous rail allowing for higher speeds. By 1960, BR's debt had amounted to £500 million, increasing annually by £100 million. In the end, the government announced the Transport Act of 1962, which wrote off the debt and handed the BTC over to a new organisation, the British Railways Board, and 5 new public corporations. The idea was to make every service self-sufficient, with new legislation brought in regarding rail closures. This would involve giving 6 weeks' notice, with proposals being published for 2 weeks, with dates, alternative arrangements, and invitations to objections. These objections would be sent to an area committee, who considered the hardships and drew up recommended measures for the Minister of Transport. After being given final approval, the Minister would make certain conditions or continue with the closure. However, there was little change and losses continued to mount. To find a solution, the new board decided to recruit from outside the rail industry, with the chairman coming from ICI. This was Dr. Richard Beeching, who produced his infamous report in 1963. The report found that 95% of traffic came from only half the network, with 98% of passengers coming from just 7,000 stations. Car ownership was increasing, whilst buses in rural areas made 4,500 stations unjustified. The study was carried out by Beeching's traffic advisor, Stanley Raymond. It looked into traffic volumes, types and costs, laying down the groundwork for the report, and recommended that BR focus on bulk loads. Published in 1963 and titled The Reshaping of British Railways, the report recommended the closure of 2,363 stations and 5,000 miles of track. It would, however, continue with the Modernisation Plan, with operational changes making it more commercially viable. The closures affected many rural areas, such as large parts of Scotland, Wales and the West Country. Some larger towns like Mansfield also lost their railway, with duplicate routes also earmarked for closure. One of these was the former Great Central, as there was already 3 other routes from London to the north through the Midlands. Another was that from Buxton to Manchester, alongside cross-country lines including the Somerset and Dorset and the Waverley route. It was predicted that these closures would save between £34 and £41 million. A further report was published in 1965, entitled Development of Major Trunk Routes. It set out a core rail network totalling 3,000 miles and mainly focused on freight, recommending a switch to bulk loads rather than wagon load freight. As the rundown of steam and railways increased, their interest from enthusiasts grew. 2 museums had already been founded at York and London, home to some of the earliest locomotives in the world. At York, the LNER had acquired further examples, including Columbine, Gladstone and City of Truro, with others saved by members of the Big Four. In 1951, the BTC had drawn up a list of locomotives to be saved for posterity. Some had historical significance, such as number 4003 Lodestar and record holder number 60022 Mallard. Each of the pre-grouping companies was represented, with some, like D number 737 and 04 number 63601, still in service, whilst North Staffordshire number 2 came from industrial service. Many had to be kept in storage, with some eventually going to the Museum of British Transport at Clapham, opened in 1961 alongside other exhibits from London Transport. Other museums, meanwhile, opened at Swindon and Leicester. Some from the collection even returned to work for a brief period. The GWR City of Truro ran from 1957 to 61, spending her downtime on the Didcot, Newbury and Southampton. Number 80 Thundersley steamed in 1956 for the centenary of the Tilbury system, whilst T9 number 120 worked in 1962 and 63. Private individuals also purchased locomotives from BR. The first was Captain Bill Smith, who acquired J52 number 68846 in 1959. He had grown up with the Great Northern and restored number 68846 into her Great Northern livery as number 1247, basing her at a private site near Hatfield. The preservation of railways as tourist attractions began in 1951 with the Tally-Clyn. The line had lost its late traffic in 1956, but was kept open by Sir Haydn Jones, the local MP. Upon his death in 1950, the railway was handed over to the Tally-Clyn Railway Preservation Society by his estate. The Tally-Clyn was followed by the Festiniog in 1954, with standard gauge preservation started by the Middleton Railway near Leeds in 1960. In the same year, the Bluebell in Sussex became the first XBR line to be saved. Other XBR lines soon followed, including the Kenton East Sussex and the Keighley and Worth Valley, who saved the whole 5-mile branch from Keighley to Oxenhope. The North Norfolk was the first to offer shares, whilst the Dart Valley was reopened in 1969 by one Dr. Richard Beeching. The first region to completely eliminate steam was the Eastern in 1962, following mass dieselisation in East Anglia. On the East Coast Main Line, engine changes at York and Grantham reduced, with steam ending south of Peterborough in 1963. In 1964, the last of the famous A4s moved to Scotland to haul 3-hour expresses from Glasgow to Aberdeen, the last going in 1966. Next was the Western region, with the last steam working from Paddington, the 4:15 p.m. to Banbury being on the 11th of June, headed by Castle number 7029 Clun Castle. The last official working came on the 3rd of January 1966, when number 6998 Burton Agnes Hall ran from Oxford to Banbury. In Wales, the last steam-hauled Cambrian Coast Express, worked by number 75033, ran on the 4th of May 1967, before the line's transfer to the London Midland region. As late as 1967, Scotland boasted a wide variety of motive power, with the A4s, Peppercorn A2s and B1s. The last of the V2s, number 60836, went from St Margaret's in Edinburgh, with Scottish Steam ending with J37s hauling a daily freight to Montrose until March. The Southern Region's fleet consisted mainly of Bullied Pacifics and BR Standards. It lay claim to having the last steam-worked main line and branch line, with the final day coming on the 9th of July. The last train was the 2:07 p.m. Weymouth to Waterloo, headed by Merchant Navy number 35030 Elder Dempster Lines. The final region to eliminate steam in 1967 was the northeastern, around Sunderland, Blyth and Hartlepool. It mainly consisted of freight classes, with J27s, Q6s and WD280s. At Holbeck in Leeds, the last 3 Jubilees ended their careers, with the last B1, number 61306, going from Low Moor. Only the London Midland region remained, with 380 locomotives by the start of 1968, all centred in the northwest. Its fleet was made up of 51 standards, including Britannia number 70013 Oliver Cromwell, which had been overhauled at Crewe for rail tour duties. The other 329 came from the LMS, with Black 5s and 8Fs. Numerous rail tours marked the end, and by July only 3 depots remained: Carnforth, Rosegrove in Burnley, and Lostock Hall near Preston. The last timetable train was the 9:25 p.m. from Preston to Liverpool, headed by Black 5 number 45212 on the 4th of August. A week later, and one last train ran on the 11th of August, the 15 guinea special. The first part was from Liverpool to Manchester, by Black 5 number 45110. Oliver Cromwell worked the train to Carlisle over the Settle and Carlisle, with the return run headed by Black 5's numbers 44871 and 44781. The final leg returned to Liverpool, again headed by number 45110. After 1968, it was up to enthusiasts to fly the flag for steam. One organisation was the Great Western Society, set up by 4 schoolboys who purchased 1400 number 1466 and auto coach number 190. The collection gradually grew, based at various sites across the Western region, eventually moving to Didcot in 1967. The A4 Preservation Society purchased number 60007 Sir Nigel Gresley, which had a brief mainline career before the steam ban. Another private owner was Patrick Whitehouse, who purchased 4500 number 4555 and Castle number 7029 Clun Castle. An unusual saver of steam was Sir Billy Butlin, who saw its potential as an attraction at his holiday camps. Locomotives of Southern and LMS origins were purchased and restored into their original liveries and displayed at Minehead, Skegness, Porthwilly and Ayr. With steam gone, the newly named British Rail decided to standardise its diesel fleet by focusing solely on diesel electrics. Known as the National Traction Plan, the biggest casualty were the Western region's diesel hydraulics. Totalling 309 locomotives by the 70s, they had become very expensive, and the last examples went in 1977. The earlier National Freight Train Plan of 1966 focused on running bulk loads such as petroleum, stone and cement between terminals and eliminated less profitable traffic such as perishables. Freightliner trains had started a year earlier, and by 1966 27,000 containers were in use. Carried on new purpose-built wagons, they were naturally larger than the standard four-wheeled type, making many yards, including a new one at Kingmore, completed in 1962, redundant. Coal traffic benefited from new HAA hoppers and a new process known as merry-go-round. This allowed coal handling to be more mechanised, especially at power stations. The system involved loading and unloading automatically without stopping at either end. By the mid-70s, expresses still had locomotive haulage due to restrictions by civil engineers, but British Rail was in urgent need for 100 miles per hour running. Work on a fixed formation train had started in 1968, with 3 prototype coaches appearing in 1970. The specifications required a 17-ton axle loading and a power car at each end. A prototype was completed in 1972, but the front end had to be redesigned after opposition from unions. Production eventually started in 1973, with 23 going to the Western region. The new high-speed train was so successful that the Western region had to revise its timetables, and by 1980, 95 sets were allocated to the region. Averaging 90 miles per hour during journey times, the units regularly clocked up 800 miles a day. Diagrams ran to Bristol, Swansea and even Newquay. On the East Coast Main Line, units worked to Edinburgh and Leeds, with those on the Midland Main Line from St Pancras to Derby, Nottingham and Sheffield. Cross-country services meanwhile ran from Penzance to Aberdeen, Poole to Glasgow and Euston to Holyhead. The HST was the brainchild of British Railway Engineering Limited, formed in 1970. It had 14 workshops, all drawing up specifications for new stock. Some of this was subcontracted out by the BREL, who also took on work as a contractor itself. Although container traffic was now in regular use, British Rail still faced road competition. To reduce labour costs, the handling system was computerised and focused on more profitable areas with air brake stock. The existing wagon fleet was reduced, whilst air brake stock doubled. A consequence was the closure of a third of marshalling yards and a fifth of freight depots. The first train, using all air-braked wagons, ran from Bristol to Glasgow in 1972. By 1977, British Rail had 20 such workings and a new type of operation, Speedlink, using fixed timetables to permit a faster service. By 1980, this had increased to 150 trunk services, with 24 secondary sites and 800 sidings, amounting to 8 million tonnes of freight carried per year. For the West Coast Main Line, the BREL developed an advanced passenger train, or APT, with a unique tilting mechanism. The idea was to increase comfort and speed through the curves at up to 150 miles per hour, with the hydrokinetic brakes allowing the train to stop within present signal distances. The project came in 3 stages. Stage 1 was the APTE, a prototype with a gas turbine and aluminium body. 2 trailers were added with articulated bogies, but the turbine was later replaced on the grounds of high fuel costs and noise. Stage 2 was another 3 prototypes, reduced from 8, the APTP. Unfortunately, this stage suffered from a series of delays and was rushed into service. This led to a series of breakdowns, with the units being withdrawn. By that time, the project had lost managerial and political support. The planned Stage 3, the APTS, never materialised and was abandoned in 1982, with the technology sold to Italy. In the 1980s, sectorisation replaced the old regions, with 3 new passenger operations, 2 of which appeared in 1982 and 3 for freight, with parcels traffic given to rail express systems. At the same time, a report was drawn up by David Serpell, recommending further closures, but this faced stiff opposition. Two electrification programmes were announced for the East Coast and Midland Main lines, with the new company Thameslink serving London. Also serving London and its commuter belt was Network South East. Its two longest routes ran to Weymouth at 143 miles and Exeter via Salisbury at 172, and was the most profitable with a revenue of £1 billion. Created by Chris Green, NSC had its own corporate image, with the stations painted in the sector's red, white and blue livery. A series of improvements also came, from rejuvenating Marylebone to new stock and infrastructure. Electrification came to the West Anglian Main Line, Portsmouth to Southampton and Watford to St Albans. Network South East also offered incentives for off-peak travel and a capital card for use in London. To help with the management, the sector was further subdivided. Marylebone and Paddington went to Thames and Chiltern, with King's Cross going to Great Northern. In the south were three divisions similar to the old Southern Railway ones, being South Western, Central and South Eastern. A new cross-London project, Crossrail, was announced from Shenfield to Reading via Liverpool Street and Paddington. This would connect with Thameslink, with the two lines meeting at Farringdon. Two new airport services also started to Heathrow via Hayes and Stansted from Liverpool Street. The latter ran along a new branch off the West Anglian Main Line from Cambridge, opening in 1991. Regional railways operated 5,000 miles of track and, like Network South East, was subdivided. The urban division was around major cities. Interurban worked cross-country services, such as that from Portsmouth to Cardiff, with rural working the secondary lines and branches. The divisions worked from 5 centres, each with its own manager, these being South Wales and West, Central, North Western, North Eastern and Scotland. With its current first-generation fleet wearing out, there was a threat of closures to some routes. However, new stock came in the form of 3 types: the Pacers, based on a British Leyland bus, a modern fleet of DMUs and long-distance units. The first Pacer unit was the Class 140 in 1981, built by Leyland. Inspired by the Leyland National Bus, it had a 4-wheeled chassis but suffered from a number of faults. Standardised from 1985, the most numerous Pacer units were the Class 142s, appearing in the same year. Further examples came from Hunslet Berkeley and the BREL, with new engines and gearboxes. The larger Sprinter units appeared in 1984, with the Class 151, which had bigger engines, aluminium bodies and air conditioning. A single coach unit, the Class 153s, were rebuilt from Leyland 155 units by Hunslet Berkeley and offered an alternative to the Pacers. Most of the Sprinter units had 2 coaches mounted on a bogie chassis, with some later increased to 3 coaches. The majority came from the BREL, apart from the Class 156, which was designed by Metropolitan Camel. In 1983, ScotRail took over all passenger services from the Scottish region. Its most southerly service ran to Carlisle, with the sector taking over the Caledonian Sleeper in 1988. The final sector was Intercity, formed in 1986. It had no subsidiaries, with a turnover of £850 million and ran on the main trunk routes, as well as the Gatwick Express, with a cross-country service from Penzance to Inverness. Operating 750 trains a day, Intercity had 200 locomotives, 1,900 coaches and 87 HST sets, the latter working in the Midlands, the West and the cross-country service. The West Coast Main Line, meanwhile, had a fleet of Class 87s and 90s with a driving van trailer at the London end. 1984 saw the start of the East Coast Main Line being electrified, with the first section from King's Cross to Peterborough. Doncaster was reached in 1988, followed by an extension to Leeds and Skipton, and the whole route to Edinburgh completed in 1990. At the same time, a plan was put in place for a new coalfield north of Selby. This resulted in the construction of the Selby Diversion from Templehurst Junction to Colton Junction near York, which bypassed the coalfield and the bottleneck over the swing bridge at Selby. Motive power consisted of Class 91s with a maximum speed of 140 miles per hour. These worked in the same formation as the trains on the West Coast Main Line, with the locomotive at the Edinburgh end and a DVT at the London end. The Class 91s first appeared in 1989 and had a new automatic train protection system, an updated version of AWS. The Gatwick Express, meanwhile, was worked by Class 73s, with 86s to Norwich and 47s allocated to other cross-country services. One success from sectorisation was the Class 158 Sprinter unit in 1989. These two-coach units had aluminium bodies and air conditioning, with 17 having an additional coach for Liverpool to Newcastle services. 22 were further developed into the Class 159s for Waterloo to Exeter workings. The BREL at York improved the design to create the Class 165s for Chiltern workings from Marylebone and Paddington. This was further developed into the Class 166 units, working from Paddington, replacing the last slam door stock. The Electrification programme was also expanded, with new schemes from Lichfield to Redditch and the North Berwick branch near Edinburgh. The Merseyrail system, meanwhile, was converted to third rail. The 1980s would see a reversal of the Beeching Report, with new stations opened, backed by local authorities. From 1982 to 1992, 120 reopenings took place, with 100 miles of track reopening, such as the Aberdare branch in South Wales. The splitting up of freight didn't occur until 1988, with the creation of Rail Freight Distribution. This was divided into three divisions: Freightliner Limited for intermodular traffic, Rail Freight International for continental trains, and Speedlink for wagon load freight, although this ceased in 1991. These were operated by two organisations, UK Business and European Business, with both further subdivided. The largest division was Deep Sea, with a 35% share, handling traffic from ports to terminals. Irish traffic was handled by UK Irish, and mostly ran through Liverpool to both Northern Ireland Railways and Irish Rail. Continental traffic, meanwhile, mostly ran through Harwich. Contract services replaced Speedlink, offering a variety of freight workings, either on a one-off or regular basis. These trains worked in block formations, being joined at either Wheelston or Basford. For container traffic, Rail Freight owned 1,300 flat wagons and 3,500 containers. These measured between 20 to 40 feet in accordance with the International Standards Organisation. In 1991, trainload freight was created with four sectors: construction, metals, petroleum and coal. The idea was for trains to run between terminals with little marshalling, and the handling would be given to customers, with contracts lasting from 5 to 10 years. The biggest benefactor from the construction sector was rural areas with minor roads unsuitable for lorries. These included the Peak District, Leicestershire and Somerset, the latter being home to a new private locomotive, the Class 59s, used by Foster Yeoman and ARC. Cement traffic, however, saw a reduction, leading to the closure of some freight branches. However, a new growth was binliner trains, carrying household rubbish from major cities due to a lack of space at landfill sites. Metals was the most flexible, with concentrations in South Wales, Teesside and Scunthorpe consisting of iron ore, scrap or semi-finished products. Scotland saw a major reduction after the closure of the Ravenscraig Steelworks in 1992, but 5 new terminals did open in the West Midlands. Petroleum was the smallest due to competition from pipelines and shipping. It was, however, safer than roads, with regular flows from Colwick to Immingham and aviation fuel to Heathrow, supported by terminals at Avonmouth and Westerly. Coal was the largest sector, with 75% of the UK's traffic. Working on the MGR system, the line from Avonmouth to Didcot was upgraded to reduce delays to intercity trains. Other flows ran to various steel, cement and chemical works. The first proposal for privatisation came in 1986 by Sea Containers, who wanted to take over the Isle of Wight line. In 1988, the government decided to adopt a system used in Sweden, with the track controlled by rail administration and the trains by the state. The first part to be officially sold off was the Vale of Rheidol in 1989. In 1991, the EU issued its Single European Rail Directive, allowing new operators into the common market, with plans drawn up in 1992. Calls for a complete restructure led to the announcement of the 1993 Railways Act. The Act saw the creation of a rail regulator, with a director of passenger rail franchising, tasked with selling parts of British Rail to private companies. Privatisation itself started in 1994, with the selling of the track and infrastructure to Railtrack and the Waterloo and City line moving from Network South East hands to London Undergrounds. The passenger services went to 25 franchises. The 5 freight sectors were sold to Wisconsin Central, who created EWS, with Freightliner being the subject of a buyout. On the 20th of November 1997, British Rail officially ceased to exist. In preservation, 8 of the 12 standards survive, ranging from the Britannias and Duke of Gloucester to the 4MT-264 tanks, alongside classes 5, 4, 2 and the 9Fs. As steam became less available in later years, diesel preservation started, from small shunters to Type 4s and 5s. A handful of electrics have also been saved, with the preservation of second generation stock starting in recent years. The oldest standard is BR's first, number 70,000 Britannia, selected for the National Collection, but later replaced by sister number 70013 Oliver Cromwell. Based on the Severn Valley, she was too heavy for the railway and moved to the Nene Valley. A mainline return occurred in 1991, and Britannia worked until 1997. Displayed at Crewe and Barrow Hill, she was sold to Jeremy Hoskins in 2006, returning to traffic in 2010. Another locomotive selected for the National Collection was Duke of Gloucester, but later rejected because of her poor performance. The cylinders, however, did go to the Science Museum, with the Duke's hulk sold to Woodhams, remaining there until 1974. Moved to the Great Central, Duke of Gloucester was considered the project impossible. After receiving help from the Science Museum and various industries, new cylinders were cast and some of the flaws rectified, most notably the fitting of the intended Culchap exhaust and chimney. Completed in 1986 and mainline certified in 1990, she was invited to be the guest of honour at the newly refurbished National Railway Museum in 1992. Since then, Duke of Gloucester has been a popular attraction on the mainline and heritage circuit. The 5MTs have 5 examples, all with their own unique characteristics. Number 73050 on the Nene Valley was the only one purchased directly from BR. On the Bluebell is number 73082 Camelot, the only one to carry a name in service. One has run on the main line, number 73096, whilst the Midland Railway Butterley's number 73129 was one of those fitted with Caprotti valve gear. The last member is number 73156, based on the Great Central, which worked over the old GCR from 1960 to 63. The 4MT460s have 6 examples, with only number 75079 on the mid-Hants yet to steam. The first to return was the Keith Linworth Valley's number 75078, with 2 running on the main line, number 75069 from 1985 to 94, and number 75014 from 1995 to 2000. Number 75029 was fitted with a double chimney in 1957 and acquired by David Shepherd in 1967. Named the Green Knight, she first went to Longmoor and then the East Somerset in 1973, eventually being sold to the North Yorkshire Moors. The final member is number 75027 on the Bluebell. The four moguls have four members, with number 76077 yet to steam. Number 76079 worked on the main line under the ownership of Ian Riley, whilst number 76084 found fame after being kept in a garden near Retford from 1983 to 1997. The final member is number 76017 on the Mid-Hants. The two MT moguls have three members, the first to return being the Keighley and Worth Valleys number 78022 in 1992, which briefly carried a Geasley ejector in 1995. Two are based on the Great Central, number 78018, who appeared in the 1955 BTF film Snowdrift at Bleath Gill, and number 78019. The most numerous of the standards are the 4MT264 tanks with 15. One, number 80002, came directly from BR after ending her days as a stationary boiler at Cowles. Moved to the Keighley and Worth Valley, she's had three operational stints, being of the ideal size and power for the railway. Even these have had mainline representatives, the Seven Valleys 80079 and Butterley's numbers 80080 and 80098. All three have returned the class to their former haunts, including the Southern region, the Tilbury system, the South West and Wales. On the North Yorkshire Moors is number 80135, which spent her days on the Tilbury system and in central Wales. Rescued from Barry in 1973, she returned to steam in 1980, being painted in non-authentic Brunswick green and certified for trains to Whitby in 1999. The final standard in preservation are the 9Fs, with 9, although number 92245 will never steam, having been displayed as a scrapyard wreck at the Barry Tourist Railway. The first to steam was number 92240 on the Bluebell in 1990, with the most recent being number 92134 on the North Yorkshire Moors, the only example with a single chimney. Naturally, number 92220 Evening Star was selected for the National Collection, one of two to come directly from BR. She had a brief mainline career, but following BR's ban on non-flangeless wheels hasn't worked since 1990. The second BR purchase was number 92203, again by David Shepherd in 1967, who named her Black Prince. In 1982, Black Prince hauled 2,198 tonnes, the heaviest train ever in the UK. Based on the Gloucestershire and Warwickshire, from 2003 to 2010, she moved to the North Norfolk, who acquired her in 2015. Diesel shunters are represented by both small and large types. The most numerous of the smaller classes are the O3s with 56, whilst the larger O8s have over 80. Both came from various sources, such as the NCB, being ideal shunters on heritage railways. The Type 1s have 4 classes, including the sole examples of classes 15 and 17. The most numerous are the Class 20s with 22, with 6 classes from the Type 2 range. One of these is the sole Class 28, number D5705, whilst number D7628 is the only mainline registered Class 25. From the Type 3 category are the Class 33 Cromptons, Class 35 High Megs and the Class 37s, some of which are still in use today. The Type 4s have 8 classes, including all 3 types of Peak and 7 Class 52 Westerns. The Deltics are the only Type 5s with their own dedicated group, the Deltic Preservation Society at Barrow Hill. The most numerous Type 4 are the Class 47s, with 31 members and 15 preservation groups. The Stratford 47 Group on the Mid-Norfolk Railway, for example, owns numbers 47367, 47580 and 47596. The West Coast Railway Company owns several for rail tour duties, whilst at Tyseley is number 47773, also mainline registered. Several types of DMU also survive, the most numerous being the Class 101s and 117s. At the Royal Deeside Railway is a unique battery electric multiple unit, and there are also 12 rail cars, with all 5 classes of pacer representing the next generation. Preservation of electric locomotives is somewhat limited, but the National Collection is home to Class 70, number E5001, and 1 Class 76, number 26020, with the largest 77s having 3 survivors, with 1 based in the Netherlands. AC motive power comes courtesy of the AC Locomotive Group at Barrow Hill, who own 1 of each class and the sole Class 89, currently under restoration. As mentioned earlier, the preservation of second-generation diesels has already started, although the prototype HST has been in the National Collection since 1990. Recently, 20 production HSTs have been saved alongside the Class 56 and 60, with 3 each. Electric Traction, meanwhile, has 2 Class 90s, numbers 90001 and 90002, owned by Locomotive Services Limited, with Class 91, number 91110, destined for the National Collection. We end this production with Peak number D123 departing Rothley for Loughborough on the Great Central, and be sure to take a look at this programme's accompanying series, The Big Four at 100.